Why do the strongest people carry the guilt of not saving anyone? This question speaks to a deep and often unspoken truth about strength. It challenges our perception of what it means to be strong. We often think of strength as the ability to overcome, to help others, to be the savior in times of crisis. But what happens when the strongest among us can't do that? What happens when their strength isn't enough to save someone, and they are left to carry the burden of guilt? The strongest people are often those who have been conditioned to believe that their worth is defined by their ability to help, to protect, and to fix. They might be the caregivers, the ones who sacrifice themselves for others, always putting the needs of others before their own. But when they fail to save someone, the guilt can be overwhelming. It's as if their entire identity, built around their ability to be strong and selfless, has been shattered. This guilt doesn't just come from the loss of someone they couldn't help. It comes from an inner conflict about their own value. They wonder, am I really strong if I couldn't save them? Was my strength enough? The trauma they carry is deep-rooted. It's not just the moment of failure that hurts, but the years of believing that they are only valuable when they are helping others. This belief is tied to the deepest layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs: love and belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. The strongest people, often the ones who give the most, are the ones who feel most disconnected when they fail. The inability to fulfill their purpose, the role they've constructed for themselves, creates a void. This void leaves them questioning everything about who they are. It triggers a breakdown of their emotional stability, where they can no longer hide from the fact that their worth isn't just defined by their ability to save others. In moments like this, they might retreat into defense mechanisms. They deny the extent of their guilt, convincing themselves that there was nothing more they could have done. But deep down, the trauma lingers, festering in their soul. This inner conflict only amplifies the guilt. They feel torn between their desire to protect and their fear of failure. The trigger could be something as simple as hearing about someone else's struggle, which forces them to confront their own perceived inadequacies. The breakdown happens when this unresolved guilt reaches its peak, and they are left to face the consequences. The consequence is not just the failure to save someone. It's the loss of their sense of self. They are no longer the strong one. They are no longer the savior. The emotional bridge in this journey is the understanding that strength isn't always about saving others. Sometimes, it's about accepting our limitations and learning to forgive ourselves. In the end, the open question remains: can we ever truly forgive ourselves for the times we couldn't save someone, or do we carry that burden forever? The strongest individuals often have a deep fear that their efforts are never enough. They are constantly in a battle with themselves, driven by an intense need to prove that their strength can overcome anything. However, this need for validation can weigh heavily on their psyche. Their self-worth is directly tied to their ability to help others, to shield them from pain, and to always be the rock that others can lean on. When they fail to save someone, even if it's beyond their control, it feels like a direct attack on their sense of self. This is where the true conflict arises. Their identity is built upon the idea that they are the ones who can fix things. When they can't fix something, they start questioning the very core of who they are. The truth they cannot escape is that their strength is not always enough. The belief that being strong means always being able to help others is a heavy burden. In reality, this belief only deepens their fear of failure. When faced with an inability to help, they can feel powerless. This sense of powerlessness shakes the very foundation of their identity. They are torn between the expectation they place on themselves to always be strong and the reality that they can't always fulfill that role. Over time, this internal conflict builds. The fear of failure grows stronger, and the pressure mounts. They wonder if they are truly strong or if they are simply pretending to be. The guilt they carry isn't just about the people they couldn't save. It's about their inability to meet their own expectations. It's as if their strength is a facade, something they use to mask the vulnerability they feel deep inside. The emotional weight of this facade is immense. They spend their days projecting an image of unshakable strength, but inside, they are crumbling. They begin to feel trapped in their own identity, unable to reconcile who they are with the person they believe they should be. The trauma they carry is not just from the moments of failure, but from the relentless pressure they put on themselves to be perfect. They start to wonder if their desire to help others is rooted in a fear of being seen as weak. They fear being rejected if they are not constantly strong, and this fear drives them to overextend themselves. But no matter how hard they try, they can never seem to measure up to the impossible standards they set for themselves. The constant cycle of trying and failing eventually takes its toll. They might resort to denial, convincing themselves that they are still strong, even as they struggle with their inner turmoil. This denial serves as a defense mechanism to shield themselves from the pain of failure. But deep down, they know the truth. They are not invincible. They are human, and their strength has limits. The breakdown comes when this denial can no longer protect them. The weight of their guilt and the pressure of their self-imposed expectations finally catch up with them. They can no longer hide from their own vulnerability. The consequence of this breakdown is a deep emotional and psychological collapse. They lose their sense of direction and purpose. They feel disconnected from the people around them, unable to be the person they once were. Their world, once filled with a sense of duty and responsibility, becomes a place of confusion and despair. This leads to a feeling of isolation. They struggle to find their place in the world, no longer sure of who they are or what their purpose is. The emotional bridge in this journey is the realization that strength is not about being invulnerable. True strength lies in vulnerability, in accepting that sometimes we cannot save everyone, and that it's okay to ask for help when we need it. The open question that lingers is whether they can ever reconcile their desire to be strong with the reality of their limitations. Can they accept their imperfections and still find peace with themselves? The inner conflict of the strongest individuals stems from a deep, unresolved need for validation. Their strength has always been their defining characteristic, a tool they use to protect, provide, and be the support system for everyone around them. Yet, despite their relentless efforts, there is a nagging feeling that something is missing, something they cannot quite grasp. This need for recognition, for a sense of being truly seen and valued, often goes unmet. These individuals, despite their outward success and strength, are trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and frustration. They constantly push themselves, not only because they want to help others, but because they crave acknowledgement, the recognition that their sacrifices and efforts matter. But in doing so, they neglect their own emotional needs. They pour so much into others that they forget to replenish themselves. This creates a gaping hole within them, a sense of emptiness that they try to fill with their actions. However, the more they give, the more they feel they have lost. Their identity becomes tied not to who they are, but to what they do for others. This internal conflict between their need for self-worth and the expectations they place on themselves is what keeps them locked in a cycle of emotional deprivation. On one hand, they have an innate desire to be strong, to be the one others turn to in times of need. On the other hand, they long for emotional connection and understanding, but they don't know how to ask for it. This contradiction often leaves them feeling alienated, even when they are surrounded by people. They are giving, sacrificing, but never receiving the emotional affirmation they need. This conflict is rooted in an unmet need for love, acceptance, and validation. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a helpful framework to understand this. While these individuals may fulfill the physiological and safety needs of others, they struggle with love and belonging. They yearn for a deeper emotional connection, but their efforts to maintain strength and control prevent them from opening up to others. They are afraid that if they let their guard down, they will appear weak, and that fear prevents them from receiving the support they desperately need. The trauma they carry is not from the failures of others, but from the constant sacrifice of their own emotional needs. The more they deny their vulnerability, the more isolated they become. They feel misunderstood, as though no one can truly see the pain. They are hiding behind their strength. This emotional barrier becomes even more apparent when they face challenges they cannot overcome. The moment they are unable to help, to fix, or to save, they are forced to confront the fact that their worth is not defined by what they can do for others. This realization, though painful, is the root of their inner conflict. It forces them to question everything they have built their identity on. In the depths of their struggle, they are left questioning, who are they, really, without their strength? This internal battle, between their identity as a caretaker or protector and their unspoken need for love and connection is one they may never fully resolve. The more they fight to maintain control, the more they risk losing themselves in the process. The trigger that sets the strongest individuals on a path of emotional unraveling is often subtle but profound. It comes in the form of an event, a realization, or a failure that directly challenges the very identity they have built. The moment of realization occurs when their strength, something they have relied on their entire lives, proves to be insufficient. Perhaps they encounter a situation where they cannot protect someone they love or fail to stop a situation from spiraling out of control. The initial response is often a wave of disbelief, followed by a rush of guilt and self-doubt. In this moment, the internal defense mechanisms begin to activate. Their first instinct might be to dismiss the feeling, telling themselves that they did the best they could, that the outcome was beyond their control. This is where the emotional disconnect begins to widen. For the first time, they are forced to confront their vulnerability, something they have spent their whole life avoiding. They have always believed that strength is synonymous with the ability to fix things, to solve problems, to make things right. But the trigger, this unchangeable reality, makes them realize that no matter how strong they are, they cannot save everyone. It's a humbling, painful moment. The trigger causes a rift in their psyche, as their sense of control slips through their fingers. This confrontation with their limitations creates a psychological conflict that they cannot ignore. The feeling of helplessness grows. This feeling, more than any failure or mistake, is the real source of their trauma. It forces them to question their worth, their value, and their place in the world. In the aftermath of this trigger, they may experience feelings of emptiness, a sense of being lost without their sense of purpose. The things that once defined them, helping others, being the strong one, now seem fragile and hollow. As they grapple with the aftermath, the emotional pain of being unable to help causes a deep sense of failure. They struggle with the idea that they are no longer the person they thought they were. The weight of this self-doubt begins to erode their sense of self, and they start to retreat further into themselves. They cannot reconcile their desire to be strong with the reality that sometimes their strength isn't enough. This breakdown, triggered by the recognition of their own vulnerability, forces them to face their greatest fear, the fear of being inadequate, of not being enough. The consequences are profound. They may push others away, believing that they must handle everything on their own. The emotional bridge that could connect them to others, authentic vulnerability, is now something they cannot access. They are trapped in a cycle of self-blame and isolation. This trigger, the moment they confront their limitations, marks the beginning of a long and painful process of self-reflection and transformation. It is the moment they can no longer deny their humanity. The moment of psychological collapse begins slowly, creeping into the strong individual's mind like a shadow that refuses to leave. Their strength, once their most reliable asset, now feels like a heavy burden. Every moment of doubt, every missed opportunity to help, becomes a nail in the coffin of their identity. The breakdown is not just about the failure to save others. It's about the destruction of their sense of self. The very foundation of who they believed they were begins to crumble. They were always the one to step up, to offer help, to be the protector, but now they are faced with their own inability to perform that role. This realization leads to a deep and painful transformation. The person who once believed they could handle anything, who prided themselves on their strength, is now faced with their own weakness. This is a bitter pill to swallow. The collapse isn't dramatic or sudden. Rather, it's a slow, insidious process that chips away at them over time. They start questioning their worth, wondering if they are as strong as they once thought. Every encounter with someone they can't help feels like a reminder that their strength is limited. As the emotional weight of their perceived failure grows, they retreat inward. The walls they once built around themselves for protection become prisons, trapping them in a cycle of self-doubt and guilt. They may find it difficult to express their feelings to others, afraid that vulnerability will be seen as weakness. The people around them may begin to notice the shift. The strong person, once full of energy and optimism, becomes quieter, more withdrawn. They no longer seem as confident in their decisions, and their usual determination starts to fade. They can no longer find the answers they once had. Every failure, no matter how small, becomes a reflection of their inability to protect, to provide, to be the pillar others depend on. The emotional collapse is mirrored in their actions. They start avoiding situations where they might fail, distancing themselves from others to prevent further disappointment. This isolation deepens their sense of loss, and they begin to feel as though they are disappearing. Their role in the world, once so clear, now seems uncertain. They no longer know who they are if they are not the strong one, the protector, the one who always has the answer. The emotional fallout of their collapse is profound. They lose touch with their true self, and in its place, a sense of emptiness takes root. The transformation is marked by an overwhelming feeling of powerlessness, a stark contrast to the strength they once felt. The change is not just external. It reaches deep into their core, altering their perception of themselves and the world around them. This psychological breakdown is the beginning of a painful journey, one that will force them to redefine their relationship with strength, vulnerability, and self-worth. They will have to come to terms with the fact that their value is not determined by their ability to fix everything, but by their ability to accept their limitations and learn from them. The road to recovery will be long, but it is through this process of self-rediscovery that they will begin to rebuild what has been lost. The long-term psychological consequences of their collapse are profound and far-reaching. In the aftermath of their emotional breakdown, the individual struggles to regain a sense of normalcy. The once clear and firm belief in their strength now seems fragile and unreliable. Every decision they make is clouded by doubt, and their actions are driven by a deep fear of failure. This fear becomes a constant companion, reminding them that their strength is not guaranteed and that their efforts may never be enough. The impact of this fear on their mental state is significant. It leads to chronic anxiety, as they constantly question whether they will meet the expectations of others or even their own. The anxiety grows over time, making it difficult for them to relax or feel at ease. Their mind is always in a state of alert, constantly revisiting past failures and worrying about future ones. The person who once had a sense of control over their emotions and actions now finds themselves overwhelmed by uncertainty and insecurity. This loss of control is one of the most debilitating consequences of their collapse. As their confidence erodes, they begin to isolate themselves from others. The fear of judgment and the inability to fully trust themselves lead them to withdraw from social interactions. They may even push away the people they care about, not because they do not want their support, but because they feel unworthy of it. This isolation deepens the sense of loneliness, creating a barrier between them and the world. Their emotional withdrawal is a defense mechanism, a way of protecting themselves from further hurt, but it only serves to increase their sense of emptiness. Over time, the individual may develop a negative self-image, believing that their worth is tied only to their ability to be strong and helpful. The inability to accept their limitations leads to feelings of inadequacy and shame. They start to believe that their worth is determined solely by their actions and their ability to protect others, making it difficult for them to see their own intrinsic value. This self-judgment becomes a cycle that perpetuates their emotional distress. The long-term effects of this mindset are evident in their relationships and overall well-being. They may become emotionally distant, unable to form deep connections because they are too focused on their perceived weaknesses. The trauma of their collapse leaves an imprint on their ability to trust others and even themselves. They no longer view themselves as invincible. Instead, they see themselves as fragile and vulnerable. This shift in perspective is both a source of pain and a catalyst for growth. While it may take years for them to rebuild their sense of self, the journey toward healing can also lead to a deeper understanding of their emotional needs. It forces them to confront their own limitations and learn to embrace vulnerability. However, the road to recovery is not easy. It is marked by setbacks, moments of doubt, and a long process of self-forgiveness. Despite the emotional toll, there is hope for eventual healing. Over time, they may come to accept that their value is not based on their ability to save or protect others, but on their humanity and the strength it takes to face their own vulnerabilities. The journey is difficult, but it is through this process of self-acceptance that they can begin to heal and rebuild a healthier relationship with themselves and others. As the strongest individual grapples with their emotional collapse, they begin to feel the weight of abandonment and loneliness more than ever before. The realization that their strength is no longer enough to protect those they love leaves them feeling isolated in a way they never imagined. Despite being surrounded by people, they feel misunderstood, as if no one can truly comprehend the internal struggle they are facing. Their identity, once built on being the reliable protector and pillar of support, now feels fragile and easily shattered. This abandonment is not just about others failing to recognize their pain, but about their own internal rejection of vulnerability. They have always prided themselves on being the one who could handle everything, yet now they feel as if they are drowning in their own emotions, unable to keep up the facade of invincibility. The fear of abandonment is rooted in a deep, existential loneliness. It's the kind of loneliness that doesn't disappear when surrounded by others. It's a feeling of being disconnected from the world and even from themselves. The emotional distance they feel is not caused by others, but by the walls they have built around themselves for years. These walls were constructed to protect their vulnerability, but now they are the very thing keeping them from the emotional connection they crave. They feel as though no one can truly understand their internal conflict, and this sense of being misunderstood only deepens their sense of isolation. This abandonment isn't just about the fear of being left behind by others. It's about the fear of not being seen for who they truly are. They have spent so long hiding behind their strength that they fear that if they show their vulnerability, they will be rejected. This fear prevents them from opening up to the very people they need most. They long for someone to reach out, to offer a comforting hand, but their pride and self-doubt keep them from asking for help. The loneliness they experience is a silent burden, one that grows heavier with each passing day. As they continue to struggle with their sense of self-worth, they are forced to confront the painful truth that their greatest fear has come to life. The fear of being truly alone, both emotionally and spiritually. This emotional void is exacerbated by the belief that they must always be strong, always be the one to help others, and never show weakness. Yet, this belief only drives them further into isolation. They begin to withdraw from relationships, afraid that their vulnerability will make them unworthy of love and support. This isolation is a defense mechanism, a way to protect themselves from further emotional pain. However, it only serves to deepen their loneliness. The longer they isolate themselves, the more difficult it becomes to reconnect with others. They are trapped in a cycle of self-imposed emotional exile, unable to find their way back to the connection they so desperately need. In the midst of this loneliness, they begin to question whether anyone will ever truly understand them, or if they are doomed to walk through life feeling misunderstood and alone. In the aftermath of their collapse, the emotional bridge between themselves and the world around them is broken. They are left standing alone, unsure of how to rebuild. The fear of abandonment weighs heavily on them, and the loneliness becomes even more acute. They had always been the strong one, the one others could rely on, but now, that identity has been shattered. The vulnerability they tried so hard to conceal is now a constant companion, haunting their every thought. Their once clear sense of purpose has dissolved, leaving them adrift in a sea of uncertainty. This feeling of being misunderstood is overwhelming. It's not just that others cannot understand their pain, it's that they don't understand themselves. The person they once knew, the protector and the helper, is now someone unrecognizable. The very idea that they might be weak is something they cannot bear to face, yet it is precisely what they must come to terms with in order to heal. The fear of being seen as inadequate keeps them isolated. They push away the people who care about them, not out of malice, but out of the belief that their weakness would burden others. They wonder if anyone will ever truly see them for who they are beneath the surface, or if they are doomed to be misunderstood forever. This isolation is a form of self-punishment, a way of avoiding further rejection. The deeper they go into this emotional exile, the harder it becomes to reach out. They have become so used to being alone with their thoughts that they no longer know how to connect with others. Their internal conflict continues to churn, each passing day filled with more doubt and more loneliness. They begin to question the authenticity of their relationships, wondering if anyone has ever truly cared for them, or if their connections were merely based on what they could do for others. This sense of abandonment, both real and imagined, feeds their growing sense of alienation. As time passes, they start to feel as though they are fading into the background, unnoticed, and unimportant. Their need for validation becomes a silent cry, one they don't know how to express. The isolation deepens, creating a void that nothing seems to fill. They long for connection, yet every attempt feels like a failure. The emotional distance they have created from the world feels like a prison, one they cannot escape from. In their heart, they want to reach out, to ask for help, but the fear of rejection holds them back. They are trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and loneliness, struggling to find a way out. This emotional turmoil is not something that can be fixed overnight, but the desire for connection remains, even as they continue to retreat further into themselves. The longer they stay in this state of isolation, the more they question whether anyone will ever truly understand the person they have become. They wonder if, at the core, they are still the person they once were, or if their isolation has changed them beyond recognition. The road to healing is long, and the emotional bridge that was once strong now feels fragile, but the hope for connection is still there, even if it seems out of reach. In the depths of their emotional journey, the strongest individuals begin to question their entire existence. They've been conditioned to believe that strength means never showing weakness, that their worth is determined by their ability to help others. But as their emotional collapse continues, they must confront the painful truth. Their worth does not come from what they do for others. It comes from who they are, vulnerabilities and all. This realization is a slow, painful process, one that forces them to strip away the layers of defense they've built over the years. For so long, they've hidden behind their role as the protector, the one who can fix everything, the person others rely on. But now, they find themselves at a crossroads, unsure of what to do without this role. The feeling of abandonment is powerful. They feel as if they've let everyone down, and in doing so, they've abandoned themselves. The loneliness they feel is not just about being physically alone. It's about the emotional isolation that comes from not being understood. They've spent so much time taking care of others, making sure they are seen and heard, that they have neglected their own needs. Now, they are faced with the harsh reality that no one can truly understand their pain unless they are willing to be vulnerable. This vulnerability is what they fear the most. It's what keeps them trapped in their loneliness. They are afraid to show others who they really are, because they believe that their true selves are not worthy of love or acceptance. This fear of being misunderstood is the root of their isolation. They long for connection, but they are too afraid to reach out. They don't want to burden anyone with their emotional pain, and they fear that if they do, they will be rejected. This creates a vicious cycle where they continue to withdraw from others, even though all they want is to be seen and heard. The emotional toll of this isolation is immense. They begin to lose sight of who they are without their strength, without their role as the helper. They question their worth, wondering if anyone will ever truly love them for who they are, flaws and all. In their mind, they are no longer the strong one. They are simply a person who has failed, a person who cannot live up to the expectations they have set for themselves. The loneliness they feel is suffocating, yet they cannot seem to escape it. The more they isolate themselves, the more they question if anyone will ever understand them, or if they are destined to walk through life feeling misunderstood and alone. They are stuck in a state of emotional paralysis, unable to move forward or reach out. They are trapped in their own mind, caught in a cycle of self-doubt and loneliness. This emotional barrier keeps them from fully experiencing the love and connection they so desperately crave. They feel disconnected not just from others, but from themselves. They begin to wonder if they will ever be able to reconnect with the world, or if they are doomed to live in isolation forever. The fear of being misunderstood and abandoned is a powerful force, but it's also what keeps them from healing. Only by confronting this fear, by allowing themselves to be vulnerable and open with others, can they begin to rebuild the emotional bridges that have been broken. It is through this painful process of self-acceptance and vulnerability that they can finally find the connection they have been longing for.